Hi everyone, thank you for joining me for today's video. Full disclosure, this is take 2 at this video. I had previously tried to film the color mixing off of a color study idea for a video with the last subject matter that you guys saw me painting, which was that red drapery, but I realized it wasn't picking up all the color nuances that I wanted you guys to see, and it just wasn't the quality that I wanted to put out. So this is a do-over, and today we're going to be color mixing off of this color study, and you can see the finished painting behind me. But we're going to use this as a reference to color mix. So we're going to talk about how I mix off of a color study, how I go about, choosing area by area, all that kind of thing. So let's go ahead and get into it. Also, quick apologies in this video if I sound a little bit under the weather. That is another reason for the delay, as I have been sick for the past week. So I'm all better, but I sound a little rough. So to get started, I'm just going to lay out the paints on my palette. I already have lead white and raw umber from a previous painting session. So now I'm just going to be adding the colors that I think will be beneficial for the area I want to paint. So I'm adding yellow ochre, cad orange, raw sienna, burnt sienna, alizarin crimson. And now real quick, I want to mention, because today, since we are just mixing for this terracotta figure, I'm not adding ultramarine blue or viridian, which I would usually add to my standard palette. If I were painting that vase in the middle, I would be adding those two pigments, but for the sculpture and the background surrounding the sculpture, I don't think it's necessary. So back to the palette, lastly, I'm adding burnt umber and ivory black. And then my palette's complete. To premix based off of your color study, you will also need linseed oil, because before we even get started mixing, you must make sure the area you're about to start comparing to on your study is oiled out. So I just have some linseed oil on this brush, and I'm going to scrub at the area on my color study to make sure it's all oiled out so I can see the colors fresh again. This only works because the color study is dry, but if it were wet, the likelihood is the colors would look fresh and I could compare accurately without oiling out. Another option is to just varnish your color study as soon as it's touched dry so you can see the colors fresh again as well. Now we are going to start by mixing the color for the light plane of the head of the sculpture. To me, it's a good starting place because it's the lightest, most facing plane on this subject. So I'll mix this first, and then I'll move to mixing the shadow color so I can build some context on my palette. While I mix this, I want to explain a bit why I use this approach. So the hard thing about working area by area or window shading is you can't see your whole painting at once, but when I do the color study, that's exactly what I'm doing. So by premixing my colors for the final painting based off of this study that was done all at once and is therefore a unified whole, I can stand a better chance at my final painting being unified as well. That doesn't mean I won't make decisions or brush mix stuff spontaneously for the final, but it's a great guide. Once I'm happy with my mixture on the palette, I will take my brush and just test a dot of my mixture on my color study. If it's correct, great, I'll move on to the next thing I want to premix, but if not, then I will keep working the mixture until my little dot of paint mixes with the color I have on my study. Right now, I feel like the dot that I just placed is too light, so I'm just going to keep mixing until the value and color are correct. Now, I'm not sure what happened to my camera exposure here. I tried to make a couple of adjustments to make it not so extreme, but it still just threw the color all out of whack. So I'm going to speed through this section and just explain what I'm doing. So here I'm pushing the light mixture till it's correct, and once it is, I test it in my color study and I feel like it blends in, so I move on to mixing my shadow color. The first few times I test my shadow mixture, it's coming out too dark, and thankfully I caught the issue with my camera before getting my shadow mixture correct. So you guys will be able to see when I finally mix and test the correct shadow color and value. and you'll be able to see it accurately. Now that the camera is back to normal, you'll see here that I was starting to cover up too much of the moment on my color study that I'm trying to test and compare. Suddenly I'm covering it all with my incorrect mixtures as opposed to leaving the color showing through. So I'm just going to take a piece of paper towel and just wipe off the fresh paint so that I can see my shadow color again. And that's actually another great reason to let your color study dry before using it in this way, is so that you can wipe off the incorrect color dots if it's taking you a couple of tries and you're still not getting it. Then rather than just be like, well, now I can't see my original color, I can just wipe off my incorrect notes and keep trying. So I've identified 4 main colors that I would like to pre-mix for the sculpture based off of the color study. I'm now looking at mixing the 3rd pre-mixture, which is the local color and value of the sculpture's torso. This changes based off of whatever you're painting. If I were pre-mixing for the pottery vase in the middle, I would probably have even more colors that I would like to pre-mix. The goal is just to give yourself enough pre-mixtures so that you don't have to stop and mix up big piles of paint while you're trying to get into the flow of painting. Or to put it differently, you want enough pre-mixtures so that if you're struggling with your pass, it's not because you don't have enough paint or enough of a string to pull from. So the point of these is just to help yourself out, make the painting process go a little bit easier, a little bit smoother. And so however many or as few as you feel are necessary, it's, completely up to you. Another thing that I want to talk about is that you'll see I'm pulling from my light mixture pile to mix this middle value color. This is because I know from looking at my study that they're pretty close in terms of hue and chroma, and the biggest difference is just the value. So in other words, this sculpture is more or less monochromatic, and if I were painting something that had local color shifts, I wouldn't be able to use one of my pre-mixtures for another in the same way. So that's just something to keep in mind while you're working on your own pieces. So while I do think it's personal preference to pre-mix as many or as few piles of paint as you want, I think it's a good general rule to have at least 3. So a shadow mixture, a middle value mixture, and a light facing plain mixture. Which, to be clear, does not mean highlight, because highlights are so small you can just brush mix them usually. But for this sculpture, I am pre-mixing a 4th color for the high chroma areas of the sculpture's arms. This more chromatic orange color is one that I see in several places on the sculpture when I'm looking at it in person, so it's just an additional color that I think I'd like to have pre-mixed for ease of painting. In terms of how long it takes me to premix, I would say that it takes me anywhere from 20 minutes to 40 minutes on any given day. I think if I'm mixing something like the flesh for a portrait or figure, that takes me a little bit longer just to get the nuances exactly right. And maybe depending on the lighting situation, I want even more than 3 premixtures to go off of. So things like that will take longer, but regardless, I think premixing is a really wonderful meditative process to get you into the mindset of painting. I do think it's important to keep in mind, and this is something that Jacob Collins really tried to introduce to me and my class in our painting year, was to not rely so heavily on the premixtures that you kind of just paint, whatever it is, like in the example of a figure, he's like, don't just paint an orange figure where you're not thinking about the colors that you're premixing. He wanted us to be able to respond to what we were seeing in life, mix it quickly on our palette, and then put it down on the canvas. So premixtures should be used as a guide, but they shouldn't become a crutch to just stop looking at whatever it is that you're observing. The goal for, I think, a lot of us is to, keep things fresh, paint what we see, and respond to nature. So just keep that in mind while you're working on these premixtures. I think they're wonderful. I do use them every time I paint, but if you feel like you're starting to rely on them too much, just put them a little bit further away on your palette. Just make them a little bit less convenient to paint with, and that can help. The last thing I want to premix are my background colors of the wall and the table, so that I'll be able to work that edge if needed as I'm painting the sculpture. For the wall, you'll see I'm just premixing the lighter portion of the wall and not the whole gradation, and that's going to be the same with the tabletop. The only thing I'm not bothering to premix is where the sculpture meets a moment of shadow on the table or on the shadow side of the vase, because that's easier to just brush mix with such a small edge. If you want to premix a pile for the shadow on the table or where the vase and sculpture meets, you are more than welcome. I just personally don't feel like it's worth the effort when it's such an easy thing to brush mix with some raw umber. I want to show you guys how I go about brush mixing on the palette, especially for these shadow areas. You'll see I'm just making this little pile right by the raw umber, and I can just quickly tint it with some other pigments to get it closer to the shadow color that I have in the background or on the vase. And I can just test it on my color study the same way I would with my larger piles of premixtures. So again, just because it's such small areas, if these shadows were occupying larger areas of the painting, then I'd probably mix a pile, but given that it's so small, it just didn't seem necessary for this one. To wrap up, the purpose of me sharing this video is to show you guys how much work can be done for the painting on the palette before you even get started putting paint down on your surface. It's not as exciting, but putting in place disciplines like this has helped me tremendously in my painting journey. I hope the video was helpful for you all. I plan to release a bunch more videos upcoming. I have a lot of plans, so if you're interested in sticking around, then go ahead and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.